Okay, so we've already looked at the amendment process, how you formally add amendments into the document, actually changing it in a quite literal way. But this document has evolved, or at least our understanding of it has evolved over time. So what I have here is categorized the informal ways the Constitution has changed over time. And I'm going to go around from basic to executive, court, parties, custom, in that order. So when we say basic legislation, what we mean is that Congress can pass a law that builds on the meaning of the Constitution. Specifically, Congress has a list of powers in Article 1, Section 8. It's a list of things Congress can do, like Congress can tax, Congress can regulate interstate commerce. And Congress makes laws so that it can do those things. So you have here like a description of what is meant by basic legislation. This is a very thin document. It's like a framework, a skeleton. And what Congress does is it reads this and builds on that skeleton, like adds flesh, adds meat to the bones of this document. So I'll give you one example. Congress has passed a law that establishes a federal minimum wage. There's nowhere in here that it says Congress can establish a federal minimum wage, but it does say Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce. And through that power, Congress has justified its making of a federal minimum wage. We're going to look at a whole bunch of those in the next couple lessons. So that's one way Congress changes the meaning of this document. Another way is through executive action. The president he is chief executive, so he heads the executive branch, and thus far we've always talked about him as like the singular entity, but actually the executive branch is very large below him, and he gets to direct that administration. He can tell that administration what to do. So I'll give you a few examples. As commander-in-chief, he directs the military, and so we've accepted that the Constitution says he is commander-in-chief, and the president, because of that, gets to deploy troops and establish strategy, goals, and missions. Also, he, as our leader, he can go make an agreement with another country. Now, technically, to get a treaty, he negotiates the treaty, brings it back, and the Senate approves it. But he can essentially make a pact, sort of an informal agreement with another world leader. That is called an executive agreement. The difference between an executive agreement and a treaty, there's two differences. The first is that it's not official. He doesn't go get the Senate to approve it formally and ratify it. And the second is because he doesn't get that formal approval, it's only as good as his word while he's in office. So he could uphold that agreement, but that doesn't mean the next president will. So he can direct his troops. He can even negotiate sort of an informal agreement called an executive agreement with another country. And he can direct all the departments below him in how they act. So this one's a little more complex. We tend to refer to these as executive orders. This is when he says, okay, I'm not changing the law, but as the enforcer of the law, I'll pick and choose which parts I enforce more or less. So I'll give you an example, kind of a local example in your own world to help make sense of this, and then I'll go to something President Obama's done with executive action. So law enforcement. Law enforcement is the agency that executes the law in your state. So here, let's think about in Austin, you know that there's many rules as far as how traffic works. You can't run a red light. You're not supposed to go over the speed limit. You're not supposed to block the box. You're not supposed to drive while talking on the phone. So you know that there's all these rules. And city council has passed a lot of those. State law has established those. But police officers, they get the discretion in deciding which ones they're going to enforce, because people break laws all the time. That doesn't mean you get caught. So, for example, Police Chief Art Acevedo has told his law enforcement now to really crack down on blocking the box because it's affecting traffic throughout Austin. So he hasn't made a law, but what he's done is he told his officers, this is the law you really need to enforce. So he tells an officer, if you're at a stoplight and you see someone do a rolling stop, you see someone going 5 miles over the speed limit, or you see someone blocking the box, the police chief has told him, go pull over the person who's blocking the box. Go ticket them. He's not saying that there's a new law. He's just saying we're going to really push this part of the law and maybe not focus so much on the others. Part of this is because of the fact that there's limited resources, limited power, limited time. So the president, he's kind of like the police chief for the whole country, and he can direct his administration to, focus on this or that. So now let's talk about an example from Obama. President Obama, as the person who has to faithfully carry out the law, he carries out immigration law, and immigration law was created by Congress. The president can deport people as part of carrying out that law. In fact, President Obama has deported a good number of people. Sometimes it's been teased that he is the chief deporter. But the thing is, kind of like an officer can decide who he's going to give a warning to and who he's going to write a ticket for, Obama has the power to also say, who are we going to deport and who are we going to not deport. And so if you've ever heard of the DREAM Act, that was legislation in Congress. It didn't actually pass. But the idea was that it would be a way for people who are in this country, not legal citizens, but they were brought at such a young age, they've been attending schools, they're currently attending university or working, allow them at least 2 years to not be deported. So he can't grant citizenship, that's what Congress can do. But he can tell his agencies, we're going to deport these kinds of people. But there might be other kinds of people that meet certain requirements. If they meet those requirements, we're not going to deport them for 2 years. It's a promise. So, and that's called deferred action. So right now, a whole lot of Americans, a whole lot of people in this country who are not citizens, are being promised by Obama to not be deported for 2 years while they get their paperwork in order. Another president could potentially ignore that. Generally, presidents do keep up with previous presidents' executive action. But the idea is he's doing something that feels like he's made a law. But it's really that he's enforcing some parts of the law and maybe not other parts. So it has the effect of being a law, but the president is doing it without Congress. Okay, so we've gone through how the president can change the meaning of his power, the meaning of the Constitution. We've gone over how Congress can change it. And the Supreme Court, through judicial review, we've seen this term before, the Supreme Court tells us what is constitutional. They tell us when you're confused by what's written in here, this is how it should be read. So that is called judicial review, the power of the court to determine the constitutionality of a governmental action. And some famous cases, in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court rules that segregation in schools is unconstitutional. They say if you open up the 14th Amendment and look at the Equal Protections Clause, that tells us that segregation does not provide equal protection of the law to its citizens, so segregation in schools is a violation of the Constitution. And eventually, it took some time, schools had to desegregate. So when you put those three things we've just gone over together, you see how all three branches are broadening our understanding of the Constitution through their daily activities. The court interprets law, but it is also interpreting this. The president enforces law, but how he enforces those laws has sort of changed and evolved, and Congress gets to make laws that add on to our understanding of the Constitution. Okay, and then let's go over here. Party practices. There's no mention of political parties in the Constitution. The framers were weary of political parties. They wanted to create a system that didn't have political parties. And how wrong they were, they developed quite quickly. Sort of inevitable. It's maybe a part of also having freedom. So political parties are not mentioned in the Constitution, yet how our government works is totally in line with the existence of parties. So what I mean here is the political parties pick the nominees for major elections. So in order to come up with a candidate, the Democrats have to come up with, currently for the 2016 presidential election, the Democrats are deciding, will it be Governor O'Malley, Hillary Rodham Clinton, or Senator Bernie Sanders? Which one of them will be the Democratic nominee? So across the country, all 50 states are having party primaries and caucuses, where people in the party are voting, are participating to figure out who will be the nominee from that party. And then the Republican Party is doing the same thing. So we rely on the political parties to sort of narrow down our options and come up with the candidate. And then also the parties are important in the Electoral College, which we haven't gotten to yet, but we'll see that later. So how the parties work, that is not governed by the Constitution, but they exist and they're important in our whole process. So they have sort of changed our understanding of the Constitution. And finally, custom. That's unwritten, based on tradition, the way we've been doing things. And if we do them long enough, we accept it as almost constitutional. It's been so widely accepted without question. An example of this would be, well, having 2 terms. Up until FDR, presidents had always had only 2 terms and they would step down. George Washington started that tradition. He was elected and then re-elected. And after serving 2 terms, he decided that he would step down to demonstrate that this idea of democracy would work, that we could have a change in power without having bloodshed. And it was really an experiment, and it was really amazing to see that this new president wouldn't abuse his power and become a dictator and not relinquish his power, but rather peacefully say it's time for the next president. Another tradition he started that we've accepted is when the president chooses people to run his various departments in his administration, those people would be his advisors, and we call that a cabinet. So originally, President Washington had 3 advisors. Now the president has 15 advisors, and we call them, when you put them together in a room, a cabinet. It's his cabinet that advise him. I'm sorry. When I said up until FDR, FDR won 4 elections, and after his presidency, an actual constitutional amendment was written to limit presidential terms. But for a whole big chunk of American history, we had that 2-term limit really as an informal procedure, and only became formal when a constitutional amendment was added to set up presidential term limits. One more custom, senatorial courtesy. The president gets to appoint federal judges throughout the country. There's actually a lot of federal judges that he has to appoint, and he's a busy guy. So senatorial courtesy refers to the tradition of him calling up the senior senator of the state, if they're in the same party, and saying, who do you want me to nominate? So the president only does this with other states that are of the same political party. So if it's a Democratic president and there's an opening for a federal judgeship in a Democratic state, the Democratic president will call the senior Democratic senator and ask, who do you want me to nominate? And that helps make the process go a little bit faster. Okay.